And so if you can find a way to find your own sweet
Yep.
spot, so to
Yep.
speak.
And this is where I think we do a disservice by talking so much about quality of food. Is it organic? Is it grass fed, grass finished? Is it all these things where it's like we don't actually know that that makes a significant difference. I would argue that I would rather have somebody take $5 to the store and buy the cheapest ground
Right.
beef and a dozen eggs, and
Right.
that could be your food for the day. And that to me is way better than what you could buy in most packages. So again, it's if you can afford it, if you appreciate it, if you like to do organic and grass fed, and like with a lot of paleo, they really get into that thing. Is like,
Right.
oh, you have to do organic, grass fed, grass finished. It's like, no, you don't.
Right.
Cows are really efficient.
There's a girl, I don't remember her name, but she's Farm Babe on Instagram.
Okay.
And her position that she's chosen to take is we're vilifying the farmers too much.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh man, I hear that.
Yeah.
I have family and friends that were in the business.
Yep.
And so it's interesting to hear her crosstalk, for lack of a better term, about GMO and
Yep.
all of that.
Yep. That's really a lot related to the class today. I do want to. So last week was more of kind of a practical, like the 3 foods to avoid. I've been trying to mix in like really practical lessons with others that just provide context, and that's kind of what this one is. I did just want to highlight something we've already said on this, like understanding the principles, make them fit into your life, and the fact that you're in charge of your health. So many times, like I don't want to make the point that like I know what I'm talking about. More so, it's the point of like a lot of these people say they know what they're talking about and they absolutely don't. So think about it in that kind of context. And a lot of this is going to come down to like common sense, and you can believe some of this stuff or not. Today gets weird, you guys. This is a weird one.
Okay.
Super weird. We're going to go over all the entities that are the players in the food world that make recommendations and tell us what things are and what things aren't. So again, when Lad and I had a conversation offline after we talked about seed oils, and he was like, well, why is it that Mayo Clinic, Tufts University,
And
Harvard all said exactly the opposite thing that you just told us about seed oils? That makes no sense. So I actually printed one up. I'm glad that you sent me links for all of this.
Good.
I just want you to like think about this. Omega-6 fatty acids, type of fat, blah, 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 can be good for the... So this is saying vegetable oils can be good for the heart and seem to protect against heart disease. The body needs fatty acids. These are called essential fatty acids. It can make most of the fatty acids it needs, but it can't make linoleic acid, an essential fatty acid that includes omega-6 fatty acids, this is all true.
Right.
You need omega-6.
Okay.
Fatty acids have different effects in the body. Some are believed to cause swelling and irritation called inflammation. So some are believed to cause inflammation. Some are designed to fight inflammation. Until more is known, you can keep your heart healthy by limiting saturated fats in your diet. Choose plant-based oils such as flaxseed or canola oil. One way to increase the amount of omega-6 in your diet is to use olive oil instead of butter when cooking. Choose Brazil nuts or walnuts as snacks. Those are also rich in omega-6 fatty acids. This is from the Mayo Clinic.
Right.
And there's an author, and you hear words that you say omega-6 fatty acids can be good and seem to protect.
Right.
Though, anytime you hear that, when you hear a study, that's always a good clue to say, like, okay, they're not saying they do or they don't. They're saying we think they might. You'll also see this a lot when you see the word associates. Eating omega-6 is associated with better heart health. Association is not causation.
Right.
So now you're looking at where they came up with that. There's weak data. Another thing that I love of all of those statements, how many citations are there in this article that people read?
Well, I don't know. There was plenty on the surface of that with Harvard, Tufts, and Mayo listed. But then, like you say, you get into their data and you're like, well, they're just drawing conclusions without actual testing.
No citations, not a single citation. This is basically one guy, this one doctor saying that this is healthy, this is not. Right. There's no backing on this. And it gets so frustrating because if you're trying to find information about this, you just get into these rabbit holes where you never get anywhere. This references this paper, this references this other paper, but there you never find the data set. Where is the data where they studied this? You can't find it. And so again, it's like these half truths that, like, yes, you need omega-6. It's an essential fatty acid. The problem is we're getting it way too much.
Right.
So they'll talk oftentimes about the ratio between omega-6 and omega-3. Omega-3 is the anti-inflammatory. Everybody, you've heard of omega-3s and fish oil and that kind of thing. So what do they tell you to do? They don't tell you to reduce the omega-6. They tell you to increase the omega-6 and then to go take fish oil supplements.
Right, which we talked about. I was doing
changes
oil and stuff like that. Change the ratio.
Changes the ratio.
You know, but even I intuitively said, wait, that doesn't sound right. That's like saying you're eating too much of something. Now just eat more.
Eat more of this other thing.
And I'm like, that's just. I was like, no, reduce the omega-6s. Then if you want to balance it out.
Yep, absolutely. So it's good that you noticed that. I'm really glad that you sent me that. I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, good.
From last time. And again, this is going to be a major topic of what we talk about today is why are these institutions saying some of the things that they say without any good evidence? So that's kind of what we'll be talking about today. Right. So again, this is very strange. This is really weird. We're just going to go through a few of these. I can't tell you, I think more than any other seminar I've done, this is the most that I've wanted to like print out things and give you things to like prove these things because it's so, you can't believe it's so wild. Any of this stuff is so bizarre and strange and wild. You just simply like can't believe that this is where we are. So the first one I wanted to start with was the American Heart Association and the American Diabetes Association. We've talked about these guys extensively. Remember, the American Heart Association was a tiny organization that reached this point where they needed to get bigger and do studies, or they needed funding, and they got that funding in the late 1940s when they won a radio ad done by Procter & Gamble, who were the makers of Crisco, who make vegetable oil-based substances. That was literally kind of the start of, we're going to start blaming cholesterol for heart disease, which eventually became, we're going to blame bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, for heart disease. That is now the house of cards on every major industry that we have. The medical system, the pharmaceutical system, the food system, they all have to say that cholesterol, and in particular LDL cholesterol, is bad for you. If that house of cards falls, that is literally several trillion-dollar industries that would all collapse. They can't sell you statins. It changes all the food that we eat. It changes the recommendations. It changes the way people get sick and have procedures done and insurances. It's just a massive thing. And so the thing I put on here was the American, the thing that we've all seen, the Heart Healthy label. So this is something that you can, I believe to this day, you can still pay for to have on food products. Until very recently, you could see it on sugary cereals. If you have a certain amount of fiber or whole grain or whatever, and you pay the American Heart Association a bunch of money, you can have this label, which again is becoming less of a thing than it used to be. But if you survived through the 90s, early 2000s, you were probably purposely picking food that had that label because it was so influential. Yeah. You'll see it a lot on a lot of different cereal boxes and that kind of thing. Heart Healthy. Yeah. What about it is... Yeah, exactly. The only thing that's heart healthy about it is because it will lower your cholesterol. And again, that's the house of cards that all of this is made from. If that falls, everything falls. So the other thing I included on here was just it's poor quality, but a screenshot of the video. This was the lead dietitian for the American Diabetes Association making the video. We've talked about this before, where the American Diabetes Association has their own nutritional recommendations, and it is to fill half of your plate with vegetables, 1/4 of your plate with your favorite carbohydrate. So potatoes, rice, pasta, bread is what she cited in this thing. And the other 1/4 of the plate could be some type of like protein source, like a lean protein source. So as we're going through some of this stuff, I also want you to be thinking about like, what is the practicality of eating that? Like how like if you ate a plate that was half vegetable, 1/4 potato, 1/4 chicken breast, like you could have that in a meal. That's kind of a weird meal, but a lot of people eat that way. Like, how would you feel from eating that meal? Like, I'd be really hungry if I ate something like that. And again, it's not that practical, and I don't know many people that could eat that many vegetables, and to do that repeatedly all day, every day, the practicality of that seems really, really tough. So just, I put these associations on here. I also put the World Health Organization. I'm not even going to get into them. It's all so ridiculous what they recommend. But again, it feeds this kind of system that all of these organizations have something to do with each other. And it's where they get their money, and it's where they get their funding. And, when you find out that a huge food organization that is sponsored by Coke then made a payment to the American Heart Association or the American Diabetes Association, it's like the conflicts of interest are absolutely just ridiculous. And so they're going to keep coming out with these statements or recommendations that are not supported by any kind of good science. And again, I would argue are not possible. They're not possible to do. I of all the years that I did personal training and coaching, worked with other personal trainers, we were all told to eat that many vegetables. I don't know anybody who was able to do it. It was like you buy a bunch of vegetables and you throw them away at the end of the week. Right. I'm not arguing that vegetables are necessarily bad for you. I just, again, to practically be able to do that, I couldn't do it. And a lot of people in the health industry that I know were not able to do it either, let alone our clients who we could then blame because they weren't eating a half a plate of vegetables for every meal in a day. A little bit ridiculous.
I think that things have changed too. And so when growing up, we had vegetables a lot. And maybe it was a time period where people really ate vegetables a lot.
Sure.
And now we've gotten out of the habit of eating it. So,
sure.
Like it's like torture to have even one vegetable.
Yeah, that very much could be. Vegetables, I would guess, tasted way better then when our soil quality was a lot higher.
The family kitchen garden was ubiquitous. It isn't anymore.
Right.
You're not gonna have it on these townhouses.
Right.
My great grandparents living up in this little 2-bedroom, I call it shack, cottage, whatever, in Heber, with 8 kids. The 6 boys slept on the 3-season porch.
Yeah.
Underpaid. But the rest of that 3rd acre, whatever,
was all grown and cultivated. Yeah. Right. It's not as high of a priority anymore. It is important to note that we, like, when we hear messages about we need to be eating a plant-based diet, the United States and the world has been on a plant-based diet for a very long time now. We already eat a plant-based diet. 60 to 70% of our calories easily come from plants. Right. We eat a plant-based diet already. And it's important to know, like, when I hear plant-based diet, what my mind goes to is salad and veggies and, those types of things. A plant-based diet is a processed food diet. It is things that come from wheat and corn and other grains. Like, you can't live on salad. You have to have something making a bulk of your calories. So it's just important to know that, like, when we see all these organizations, we'll talk about more of them pushing for plant-based. We are plant-based. Like, make no mistake about it. We've been so for a very, very long time. It's just a plant-based diet is not what I think of when I think of, a vegan's eating a salad. Like, you can't live on salad. You have to be eating soy, grain, bread, rice and beans, whatever. Like, that's the truth of plant-based diet, let alone all the processed crap that you eat that comes from packages and boxes and bags.
But I also don't, you said processed food, and I don't see vegetables as a processed food.
True.
Like, you go to the grocery store in the produce aisle and you get these things. Yeah, they're produced by somewhere else. But I think of it as food that's been manipulated and created and stored in a box or stored in a can as processed. Which would be even further away from the natural.
Good point. Yeah, good point. And again, I don't get to, if somebody says they want to continue including fruits and vegetables in the diet, like, you're at least eating the whole food. That's great. Do that if you want.
I see when you're saying plant-based, I see people that are saying only eat vegetables.
Right.
Only eat this, kind of the opposite of you.
Right.
And somebody else would see a carnivore diet as, well, that is so
totally
strange.
Yeah.
And it can't possibly give you all the nutrients you need. So it's all the perspective and what you know about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you want to be plant-based, That's I know lots of people are plant-based, and it's fine. You have to know what you need to supplement. You have to know how to structure your meals so you're getting adequate protein, and as long as you can do that, I think it's fine. So that's a good point.
There was an interesting article in the Financial Times that a friend posted about this guy who's an Italian food critic, and he's like, "What we believe is traditional Italian food isn't, and it didn't become that until after the World War II."
Yeah.
And yet they have hopped on this bandwagon of creating these certified Italian foods from the government and stuff like that. And they weren't even really in the average Italian home prior to World War II.
When they were decimated and not eating what they admitted were the foods that they wanted to eat.
And the interviews that they did with grandparents who just happened to be kids during that time and they're still alive.
Yep.
They're saying, "What are they talking about?"
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And so I'm like, and he said, "So what we are being peddled as tradition really isn't."
Yep. It's true. And yeah, if you look at a traditional Italian cuisine, you don't find calories and protein and macros. You see traditionally made pasta and like
Right.
certain things that are their recipes. They don't want to talk about nutrients and calories the way we think about it. It's their cuisine. It's food. It's just
right. And the thing this article pointed out is that most of the older people they interviewed, in the majority of them, at least prior to that time, their diet consisted mostly of beans and potatoes.
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, it was very, it was another little tidbit.
Yep.
In the picture, I'm just like, oh my God.
So much context, all of it. So those are organizations. Important to say that those organizations are not part of the government. They sound like they are, but they're not. These are different. Right. The American Heart Association has nothing to do with the government besides the fact that the USA government jumped on board with the American Heart Association guidelines for eating because they were the first ones to come up with a guideline of how to eat. So the next one, the US government, I actually put a food recommendation. This is prior to them coming up with the dietary guidelines that we all kind of love and know now. This is what it always used to be, where like it's picked from these 7 healthy kind of groups of foods. This is how it always was. Americans were really healthy through the 40s and 50s and 60s. We didn't have an obesity crisis. We were just starting to, get heart attacks rising, but like we were very tall and robust. And if you see pictures of Americans at the beach in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, like everybody looks really healthy. And it's like all these, this recommendation is like things you should get is like butter is one, bread is one, meat, poultry is one, a whole group for like dairy and dairy products, vegetables and fruits, potatoes is one. The fruit has its own one, and then it's got like green vegetables. Like all of these things were recommended, and everybody knew that's how you would get good nutrition. Is just get a balance of all of these things. And then again, when we started to blame heart attacks on cholesterol, we had to change that narrative and start to step away initially from saturated fat, which then became get rid of all fats. And that's when we lived through the low fat kind of dogma that we still see to this day. So I printed this up today from myplate.gov. So these are the current nutritional recommendations. This is the Start Simple, Small Changes Matter kind of guide that is it's like a pamphlet for consumers, essentially. If you want to read the whole guidelines, they're like 150 pages long. It's like ridiculous. Also, they're pretty garbage. They're not great to read through. This is where we had that quiz where we asked you guys, like, what's the current recommendation in the USA guidelines for cholesterol? And most people are surprised to know that the government guidelines don't make any recommendations on dietary cholesterol anymore. They backed away from that one and stopped telling people that they should limit that. But again, that's not common knowledge. They didn't have a press release and announce it to the world. It's on page 34 in a small paragraph of the 2015 guidelines, that if you're really a glutton for punishment and want to read through that, you can, but you'll never find that. And the recommendations are always the same. They never change as far as what they tell you to eat. Healthy eating routine, blah, blah, blah. It's important to eat a variety of fruits, vegetables, grains, protein foods, and dairy or fortified soy alternatives. Choose options for meals, beverages, and snacks that have limited added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium. So here are the recommendations. This is our own United States government. Focus on whole foods. I couldn't agree more, but it just says, ready to eat fruits, fruit salsa, Add fruits such as orange sections, apple wedges, and grapes to a salad so you get more of your fruits. Vary your vegetables. So this is one I hear all the time. Get a variety of vegetables. Again, if you want to do that, that's fine. Make soup from vegetables in your vegetable drawer. Snack on raw vegetables. Still recommends 6 servings of whole grains a day, and it recommends that half of your grain meals come from whole grains. So enjoy whole grain based cereal, hot or cold cereal. Go for whole grain puffs or flakes that are new to you. You might discover a new favorite. Instead of sandwich bread, try whole grain pita, tortillas, naan bread, or other whole grain flatbread. Create your own trail mix. Vary your proteins. Broil lean cuts like sirloin, round, or flank steak. You can roast lean types of pork, tenderloins, or loin chops. That's the only time really like beef is mentioned, and it's only the leanest. Have fish or seafood twice a week. When I looked through different recipes that are recommended for my plate, first of all, it's weirdly hard to find them. You don't just see like tons of examples of how you put this together on a plate. There is tons and tons of recipes that have chicken and fish and hardly anything else. Move to low-fat or fat-free dairy, milk, or yogurt. So add low-fat or fat-free dairy. Nutrients in dairy are important at every stage of life. Just make sure they're low-fat, or replace your dairy with soy milk or soy products. Choose foods and beverages with less sugar, saturated fat, and sodium. We mentioned that. So packaged food that have no added sugars, that's something you can read. Plain water with a squeeze of fruit. Fine. Tips for less saturated fat. In place of foods higher in saturated fat, looks for foods like nuts, seeds, and fatty fish, like tuna, salmon, trout, mackerel, which are high in unsaturated fats. Choose canola oil, olive oil, or other vegetable oils for cooking. So again, more American Heart Association recommendations, and then lower sodium and salt. Found that it'd be very interesting. Who do you think comes up with these?
Whoever has the most money.
Interesting. Do you think there's any conflicts of interest on the panel of people who are choosing these guidelines? Maybe people that are paid by food industry.
The thing that I've seen as an armchair observer of government is that, and my brother being as we talked about heavily involved, he's in an organization called OSAC, Organizational States of America, or something like that. And he's on the governing board. And the number of people that are in that system that are from, like, what's the Davos, is it? The Swiss big rich people all get together.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Yep.
As near as I can tell from just even hearing firsthand that people that are involved in it, they really get it mixed in with.
Yep. What percentage? How about this? What percentage of the panel that came up with the 2020 guidelines have a conflict of interest?
100%.
98.
You guys are both very, very close. And probably technically true if you consider that 100% of the people on the panel are paid by the U.S. government. And if you didn't go along with what they said, you're probably not going to be on the next panel. This is just looking at outside. This study, conflicts of interest for members of the U.S. 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. The abstract of this study was to measure the incidence of conflicts of interest with this committee. We checked out all the people. Results. Our analysis found that 95% of the committee members had conflicts of interest with the food and or pharmaceutical industries, and that particular actors, including Kellogg, Abbott, Kraft, Mead Johnson, General Mills, Dannon, and the International Life Sciences, had connections with multiple members. Research funding and membership of an advisory executive board jointly accounted for more than 60% of the total number of conflicts of interest documented. 95% of people paid by companies like Kellogg, Abbott, Kraft, Mead Johnson, General Mills, Dannon, and International Life Sciences. Again, they didn't just say food, they also said pharmaceutical. Do you see how all of this relates? Remember, if cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease, why are we prescribing statins? They're going to be very much willing to pay a lot of money to keep the story going, to keep foods low in fat and low in cholesterol so they can continue to sell statins. That's why pharmaceuticals care about this. Why would a company like DuPont or a chemical company care about this? Well, if you are doing farming of these annual crops, you now need fertilizer. It's you can't get fertilizer. You don't get fertilizer from animals because you don't let animals graze in the crops anymore. So now you need chemicals. So you hear companies like DuPont contributing and contributing to things like this all the time because it's all money for them to keep the food system the way that it is. So I thought that was really fascinating. This study here,
Yeah.
Cambridge.
Cambridge.
Yeah, published online by Cambridge University Press on the 21st of March, 2022.
Okay.
It was reported by Nina Teichel's nonprofit that she started called the Nutrition Coalition. Her mission is to get the U.S. guidelines to be based on science. The U.S. guidelines are not based on any kind of science. You would think they would be, and they never are. And so her whole thing is like, if we can just get these based on science, this might not be important to you and the food choices that you make, but the guidelines set what dietitians tell you, what you eat in hospitals, what our military is fed, what kids are fed in schools. It's a big deal. It makes a huge deal in all of these things. And until we can get them changed, they're just going to keep going with what they're doing. They reviewed several low carbohydrate studies in the 2015 review and have since not even bothered to review any of them. Any results saying we're reversing type 2 diabetes. Like, we have data and they just will not look at the studies. They just don't. And then they just come up with these guidelines, and that's what we're given. And that's what's told everybody to follow my plate.
Troubling to me about that whole scenario, though, is that a lot of times the people that start out with those initiatives and make commercial things out of them do have good intentions.
Sure.
And then it becomes, I go there because that's political. But I've seen cases where people, they do start out with the right intentions, but then as they get into it and then it does become profitable and it becomes more
Yes.
where they've lost track of their original motivation and stuff like that,
yep.
that it becomes more problematic.
Follow the money, right? Once you have industries that are set up around these things, they're not easily toppled anymore. So you may have started with good intentions, but once the industry wheel is going, kind of can't really stop it.
Well, but so it's kind of like you don't want to kill all innovation.
Right.
And innovation is driven by good intentions and profit.
Yep.
And so it's kind of like, so I get that, but it's like, where do we find? I mean, the thing that I hear when I hear that one, it's kind of like, where do we find true objectivity?
It's really, really hard, and it's why I wanted to preface this whole thing by saying, just remember, I'm not trying to say that I'm right about this stuff. We're just trying to discover where this stuff is coming from. And at the end of the day, you're going to leave here and decide what your next meal is going to be. Do you want it to be with heart healthy vegetable oil, or do you want it to be with butter and red meat? Like, it's how do you know? You kind of don't. You have to try. You have to do the experiment on yourself and see how you do. This one's my favorite.
I need to go back. So you said thinking about these companies that create products, and I saw a listing yesterday of, I think, either Dow or DuPont, but then they're probably the same company
Right,
now.
probably.
And they had a list of like 50 different companies that are all under them.
Yep.
And most of those were food companies, while you've got the poison and you're mixing the two. Then it goes back to the grains that are being produced, and they create the fake grains, right? And they have the chemicals in them to kill the bugs, so it'll be better for the economy and everything. And then I see a few things that say now, the celiac disease, it's not the grain that's the problem, it's the chemical that's put on it that's making everybody sick. But then that creates them to buy specialized products that their stomachs can handle. So it's just all this big mess. And
it is a big mess.
I felt the same way, that people start out in a business, they're just fresh out of college, they don't have any experience, but they join an organization. Yep. Or they might join the organization and then become on a board, and then they become on a company thing. So it's all this big mix mash, but they start out with the right intent.
Sure. Yeah, I love that.
And I mean, they never even understand what they're doing.
Very
because
true.
they're believing that one lie that was told.
What if the American Heart Association, they get this big payment from Procter & Gamble, which you can look at and say, like, that's not really ethical. But then again, if you're the American Heart Association, you're trying to prevent heart disease. You think at the time it might be cholesterol. Oh, this is great because we think it's this, and we got funding from somebody who produces an alternative. This is beneficial for everybody. Everybody wins.
Right.
And you can't back away from that. You can't just come out and say, like, whoops.
Right.
And you can only react on the information you have.
Yep.
And if we keep it all secret, then
Yep.
nobody's going to ever have the full picture.
Yep. Yep. The way I like it put by somebody I just interviewed on the show who writes all about seed oils, we talked about her, Dr. Kate Shanahan, and she's like, good leadership would be that somebody at some point in one of these organizations would say, wow, we got this wrong. We thought it was this. We got it wrong. We apologize. We're updating our information. You're never going to hear that. They have to double down. They have to push harder and harder and harder into LDL cholesterol causes heart attacks. That's it.
Yeah.
This is my favorite. Okay, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, cereal companies, and the blue zones. What are you talking about? What does the Seventh-day Adventist Church have to do with cereal companies? What does that have anything to do with blue zones? What are blue zones? This is so strange. We're going to start by telling a story that I've told before. Dr. Gary Fettke, doctor in Australia. He was an orthopedic surgeon. He ended up getting cancer in like 2004, 2005, I want to say. Somebody told him you should really cut out sugar out of your diet. He did really well with cancer treatments. The cancer receded, never had a problem. He was noticing that in his office, where he was fixing knees and shoulders and doing things that orthopedic surgeons do, he was then moving to do more and more and more amputations for diabetics, to the point that his office called it Fettke's effed up fungating fructose food folly Friday in the office. So just like this ridiculous name, because every Friday in his clinic, it would be toes and feet and all kinds of amputations, and they were increasing. He found that his patients were being fed 2 to 3 servings of ice cream in the hospital and tried to fight back against it. He then received complaints from 3 different dietitians in Australia who then tried to take his license away. He had to fight an enormous legal battle. His wife was not going to take this without a fight. So Belinda Fettke started doing research on who was responsible for these dietitians, who was the message coming from, found some ties to a cereal company, the most popular cereal company in Australia called Sanitarium, that was owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Cereal companies were going after Dr. Fettke because he was saying, like, you shouldn't feed patients a bunch of sugar in the hospital, and he incurred the wrath of a cereal company. She started doing research into this, and this is largely a part of her. I got this book, The Great Plant-Based Con, which has an entire chapter on this stuff where Jane Reese Buxton, right off the bat, says, everything I know about this is thank you to Belinda Fettke. What does this have to do with the Seventh-day Adventist Church? In the 1840s, there was a sect of religion called the Millerites. And in 1844, they said that Jesus was going to come back. So what they did is they sold their possessions, they gave stuff away. It was to the extent that they didn't make their kids go to school. They all gathered on a hill to wait for the second coming. It didn't happen. They called it a great disappointment, and that was kind of the end of this religion. One girl that was involved in the religion, her parents were deeply involved in this. She ended up having, I believe it was a pretty severe concussion at some point. It was actually comatose for several days. She started to develop visions from God, and she was the founder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In the history of her writing about different things, she was very much into the temperance movement. So the temperance movement was to combat the kind of problems we were having at the time with people drinking way too much, people smoking way too much, being really, poor behaved. And so temperance was a stepping back from, basically regaining our morality in a sense. So she was writing books, and one of the people that was doing typesetting for her, he was a 12-year-old boy. His parents were also part of the Millerites. They did not send him to formal school because the second coming was going to happen. So he started typesetting for Ellen G. White and writing out some of the things that she was saying as far as her her visions that she was having against, in particular, carnal sin. So one of the great publications that she came up with, Ellen G. White, was called, I'm going to forget it now. It's like a plea to mothers or something like that, where they basically said the worst thing that you could do related to moral sin, especially in boys, well, and girls, is like sexual pleasures and pleasuring yourself. That was the worst thing you could do. As you write about it, you hear that the kind of what would happen to you. You'd go blind. You'd lose your mind. There's all kinds of things that would happen to you physically if you indulged in this. And this 12-year-old boy was John Harvey Kellogg. If you recognize the Kellogg name, it is because John Harvey Kellogg was the inventor of Kellogg's Flakes, as they were trying to promote ways of, having people reach that level of morality. They wanted to invent bland foods that would replace normal breakfast foods at the time, which would be like leftovers from dinner.
We don't want to overstimulate.
We don't want to overstimulate, so we want these bland. Keep in mind, this is before like sugar cereals. Obviously, this is like wheat flakes. They're not very good. John Harvey Kellogg invents cornflakes to be the replacement for these foods. His brother eventually ends up taking over and adding sugar to these cereals to make what is now what we would all come to know as Kellogg, the Frosted Flakes, exactly. Okay, weird. What does that have anything to do with today? John Harvey Kellogg eventually, as a Seventh-day Adventist, they did send him to medical school. He became a medical doctor, so he's known as Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. What you picture as a hospital today largely came from his ideas. So his buildings called sanitariums were where people would travel. This is in Battle Creek, Michigan, where all the cereal companies come from. It's where Post came from. Graham, the original inventor of graham crackers, was all in cahoots with the same thing. John Harvey Kellogg was the first one to have these buildings where you had multiple different offices. He was the first doctor to wear a white lab coat. That's where that comes from. And he would cure people by getting them on these bland foods, largely vegetarian diets. And they would do things like enemas and all kinds of different stuff to help treat people. John Harvey Kellogg had an absurd number of kids, but according to some of his writing, never actually had sex with his wife, ever, because, again, he believed in the carnal sin thing, and he also was probably seeing the effects of then, like, sexually transmitted diseases, which were uncontrolled at the time, and, like, syphilis, I've heard, is, like, absolutely awful the way it, like, completely distorts your brain. So he was like, nope, I'm out. What's that? I would think so, sure, yeah. Anyway, again, it's a relatively small religion, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I don't know many people that are Adventists.
In the 80s, they were nearly as large as Mormon.
Okay.
And I've known a number of them.
20 million is kind of what I've seen worldwide of Adventists, lots of overseas.
They're often out there on the street, at least in the U.S.
Proselytizing?
Yeah. And just kind of Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, and Mormons are all kind of thrown into the same buckets with the evangelical community.
Gotcha.
And people out there on the street that are
sharing. I see Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons obviously around here. I hardly ever see the Seventh-day Adventists, but I know you're right. I know that's part of what they do.
The Seventh-day Adventists usually show up on a curb around here at a museum.
Oh, okay.
Or something like that.
Okay.
They're not quite as proactively going door to door.
Well,
Got
I think they all start out thinking what they're doing is
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
good.
Yep, of course. And we'd be talking about, why are we talking about any religion to begin with? Like, we don't need to talk about any of this, and except for the fact that because the Seventh-day Adventist Church believed in the Garden of Eden diet, and have been promoting the Garden of Eden diet to promote the second coming, they were the ones who started all of the original dietetic schools. I'm talking 1910, 1917, the very first nutrition textbooks were not based on fact and nutrition. They were promoting plant-based vegetarian diets because the Seventh-day Adventist Church promotes the Garden of Eden diet. And so until very recently, it was their schools were named Adventist schools. They have a massive amount of impact. They've had a massive amount of impact for over a century, but to this day, they still own a massive amount of media companies, schools, teaching institutions, all promoting this idea. Yes, and the cool thing about the Adventist Church is unlike the government, the American Heart Association, any of these other entities we're talking about who are trying to hide what they're doing, not the Adventists. They are proud of what they're doing. So you can look up a document that's called like the Nutritional Influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I was just reading it. It's crazy how much influence they have. And they're in this study where they talk about all of this, written by Adventists. They're bragging about how much influence they've had and how much they've been able to change the conversation around nutrition, in particular towards plant-based diets. Okay, we understand that. Blue zones. What does this have to do with blue zones? What are blue zones? Blue zones are a project that 4 scientists undertook back in 2004, where they wanted to identify places on the Earth that were isolated that have a greater proportion than average of centenarians. People live to be a very, very long age. They identified Sardinia in Italy, Icaria in Greece, Okinawa in Japan, and Nicoya in Costa Rica. These places, for whatever reason, have people that have a disproportionate number of people who live longer than other places. There were other areas that were identified but were not promoted, like Iceland or other Scandinavian areas where people live a really long life, but those are the ones that they picked. In 2005, the author that you see on the right, his name's Dan Buettner, gets involved. He is working for National Geographic at the time, and he wants to write an article about this, but also sell this as a concept. This is the longevity kind of cure. Whatever we're finding in these areas, we're going to then promote them as something that's going to help you live very, very long lives. So Dan Buettner realized that to be able to sell the blue zones concept, he has to find a blue zone in the United States. It has to be one that we can relate to. Now, all these blue zones that I've already mentioned are smaller communities. They're isolated. They're where you are born, you live, and you die. And there's lots of different things that they do. But identifying the 5th blue zone in America came down to identifying Loma Linda as the blue zone in the United States. Loma Linda is a Seventh-day Adventist, basically retirement community where people, they're born there, they live there, they die there. It's where you retire to. You have a certain level of affluence, and then everybody is following the teachings of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so you literally, you can't find, a lot of them are same as Mormon teachings. You can't find liquor stores. They don't drink caffeine. They don't smoke. They, promote a lot of healthy activities and families and that kind of thing. Very, very similar. But now you have just created this concept that can be sold. So Dan Buettner over the years has written many, many books about the blue zones. As part of the blue zones and as part of their involvement with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they started promoting a very high plant-based diet. Today, they recommend that 90 to 98% of your calories come from plants, that you have the Blue Zone branded, the Blue Zone diet is 2 golf balls, or maybe it's 5 golf ball sizes of portions of meat in a month, a limit on a dozen eggs per month, lots of these plant-based products, because again, with the religious influence, they're promoting the Garden of Eden diet to their members. When you go to some of these blue zones, travel to Sardinia, travel to Costa Rica, these people that live a long time, they respect their elders. They are very active. All of them are on hillsides, so there's a lot of activity and people climbing up and down. Your old people are with you all the time, so they're not shunned and placed in a home. They're actually part of the community. They all do all kinds of different things. But since, again, there's this influence of the religion and the Garden of Eden diet, they are promoted as eating plant-based diets, which is absolutely not true. If you go to any of these places, they don't eat in a certain way. Yet you hear about purple sweet potatoes in Okinawa.
Well,
They
have fish and lots of other meat too.
Exactly, like goats in Greece, in Italy. This funniest story. I think I brought the book Eat Like a Human by Dr. Bill Schindler. He's an archaeologist. He travels around to all kinds of different places. He traveled to Italy last year to learn a bread making technique using acorns and a cheese making technique using maggots. Literally to watch him and his wife, Savage, cut open this block of cheese to see the soft, runny cheese with live maggots inside and take it, spread, cheers, down the hatch. It's whoa, she is savage. Anyway, he realized that as he was there, he found himself in the heart of one of these blue zones, Sardinia. And he was like, wow, like, that's cool. Everybody says these guys are plant-based. Any house, so we talked about it after he got back. Any house he went into, as soon as he got there, they would bring out a giant tray of salami and cheeses, and they would eat meat off of this every meal, essentially. Then on Saturday, all the people were like, we're going to eat meat today. You should join us. We're going to eat meat today. And he's like, we're going to eat meat today? What are you talking about? I've eaten more meat here than I eat at home, and I need to eat a lot of meat at home. What that meant to them was that that was the day they were going to kill an entire animal and cook it as a barbecue and have a community like barbecue. That's how eat meat sounded to them. Yet people travel from all over the world to do these documentaries where they're showing them make minestrone soup that's all vegetable. And they're like, they get so confused. Like, yeah, we make this sometimes, but this isn't like our diet. Like, we don't understand why all these people are filming us do this. So the documentary came out last year called The Secrets of the Blue Zones. We're going to talk more about documentaries in a few minutes, but you see Dan Buettner riding his bike, and he's just an everyday dude, and he's like on this journey of discovering, like, I wonder what these people are doing. Like, you get this concept of like this journeyman. Oh, I'm like discovering this culture, and wow, they eat this certain way. It's a complete bait and switch where all they recommend is dietary changes. They don't talk nearly as much about the longevity of these people as far as like their social life or their activity level or whatever. It's so ridiculous, yet they make this beautiful documentary that looks great. It's all about the blue zones. The blue zones as a concept today are owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I can't remember how many tens of millions they paid, but our city, your city, anywhere you are, Fort Worth, Texas is a good example of this, can apply for several $1,000,000 to be consulted to be a blue zone city, where they come in, they help you make more, or they recommend make more walking paths, meat-free diets, plant-based diets, all of that promoted as a concept, which is now owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It just does not get any more bizarre than any of that. Whenever I'm telling this, I always have to go back and listen to like an interview that I've already done to be like, okay, this can't be this weird.
But they're ignoring the parts that do not fit their agenda.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep, exactly. Again, the best way I've heard it described is just a bait and switch. We're going to use these areas where people live. We're going to ignore entire populations. Like I said, Iceland. Nobody talks about the Mormons. Mormons live just as long as Seventh-day Adventists. They practice the same kinds of things, but Mormons don't promote plant-based diets. Why do Mormons live as long as they live? Could it be that they also are avoiding drinking and smoking and promote families and do a lot of other healthy things? Nobody talks about it. You just ignore all of that stuff and plug in, play whatever you think is best for longevity, and it sells all of these books and programs. And again, if you see this documentary, if you didn't know any better, you would be so convinced. It's beautiful. It's done amazingly. It makes all the sense in the world. It's just so scammy and so weird. So that is the Seventh-day Adventist Church cereal companies in the blue zones. You would think that a religion, again, based on whatever their beliefs are, over a century ago, 160 years ago, would not have as much influence as it does today, but it does deeply in our nutrition to this day. Seventh-day Adventists, who knew? Last few things to discuss were something that we mentioned in the beginning, which was biased nutrition schools, including Harvard, Tufts, and Stanford. This is very much related to the things you sent me. Why is Harvard saying this about seed oils? They don't have scientific references on a lot of their articles, but they just say like, oh, this is good for your health. This definitely will reduce your chance of heart attacks. This is going to lower your cholesterol. All of which may be partially true, but they're based on really weak data. Why is it that we hear from...
Or even ongoing. I know that when I was reading some of the articles, they would interject that this is not conclusive yet. It started out with small study. Even with Bickman and a lot of people, you run into studies that are done on small groups and lots. They're not broad studies. And he's even acknowledged how difficult it is to get that.
Yep.
And so I'm like, and they do interject, well, it's not, they do occasionally say it's not completely conclusive.
Right.
I don't know how many times I've run over that this last week.
They'll say that a lot, won't they? Yep.
And I'm just like going, and that gets back for me to I got to do what I feel
Yep.
is right.
Good point. It's the wording too of like, here's a perfect example. This is the same thing that you sent me. This is the thing from Mayo Clinic. Until more is known, you can help keep your heart healthy by limiting saturated fats in your diet. Until we know more, just do this because this is fine.
But that's based on bad data.
But it's not based on good data.
Right.
But again, that assumption, and it's so strongly worded, yeah, we don't know everything, but we're very sure that you can just do this because we think so. So it's really deceptive. And you don't see the study, you see the headlines. Again, you try to dig up some of the data from this stuff and you just go in circles and never find any of it.
But getting back to individualized courses, because while we can come up with family, like my family, like we talked about before, statins are bad for all of us.
Yep.
But the difference between my cholesterol and body way of processing sugars and cholesterol and stuff like that is far different than my brother just told me.
Right.
And when I was a kid, the first time I became aware of this phenomenon is my parents, I think it was the standard hot roast dinner, or we had some steak or something like that. And I am just going to town on the fat that had not been trimmed. And they're like, what are you doing? I was like, that is the best tasting stuff on the earth. And they're like, no, you got to cut it off. Even since I was a kid, I still prefer on a barbecued steak and stuff like, trim off the fat. What are you doing?
Yeah, it's the best part.
Exactly. And so, but whereas someone else in my family's like, I can't stand that.
Yep.
And we're all sitting at the same table.
Right. And same genetics and whatever. So yeah, it does come down to preferences, and there's so many different factors to it.
And they've been told that's the bad part for you. It's
Yep.
going to cause a heart attack. So don't eat that. You need to live longer.
Yep.
But I'm like, my body's going, yum.
Yeah. So in all the articles that you sent me, lad, you would have come across a name several times, Darush Mozaffarian. I think he was mentioned in the Harvard and the Tufts articles both.
Yeah, probably.
So he is in charge of the Tufts Food School. This is one of the top-rated, most respected nutrition schools in the country. In 2022, they came out with the Food Compass. This is a rating system on different foods that ranks, I want to say, like 8,000 different foods based on things you should eat more of, things you should eat less of, things you should completely avoid. So however they made their algorithm of checking the healthiest foods and the least healthy foods, this compass comes out as a food rating system. Wade, you are going to be very, very, very happy to know that two foods that scored a perfect 100 on the scale, one of them is watermelon. 100 out of 100, perfect score. According to Tufts University, you can have a truckload of watermelon.
It's water.
I don't understand, like, even kale, I'm like, okay, at least that's like kale. I don't understand. Watermelon has like almost nothing to it besides water. This and sugar. This rating system, it's. I was happy when this came out because it's so ridiculous. I thought this would finally be the thing that, like, okay, this is so far beyond simple logic and common sense. This is gonna be the thing. It's been largely embraced. Look at some of these foods. This is done. I'll bet you Nina Teichel's put this graph together because this isn't obviously the comprehensive list of 8,000 foods. This is just some examples. 87 out of 100 frosted mini wheats. 84 Great Grains double pecan whole grain cereal post. 81 Great Grains banana nut crunch. 76 shredded wheat honey nut post. Great Grains raisin bran honey bunches of oats with vanilla bunches of 72. This was also in the quiz that I sent you guys. Remember, these are the top rated healthiest foods that are green that you should be eating more of. You should eat more frosted mini wheats. Frosted mini wheats tested higher than shredded wheat. I know what I'd rather be eating.
There must be some synergistic effect going on.
Interesting. You think maybe? Yellow. These are to be moderated. So moderate your maple pecan crunch by post. Moderate your Special K cinnamon pecan. I would have put that in the green. Special K, remember that's like the healthiest cereal ever. Honey Bunches of Oats, other varieties. Nutri-Grain cereal bar tested at 52. Special K vanilla tests at 50. Special K vanilla almond tested the same score of 50 as a grilled chicken fillet.
Well, those aren't impressive scores on either one of them.
They're equal.
I know, but they're at 50.
Is there a
Why would I eat anything below a 75?
then you
Isn't
stick with
70,
the
I mean, isn't it the higher the goal?
Raisin Bran was only 72, so Kellogg's Raisin Bran was only 72, so you have to avoid Kellogg's Raisin Bran, which goes soggy the second you look at it anyway, so that's okay. Red categories to be minimized are eggs fried in butter scored at 29, cheddar cheese scored at 28, and ground beef cooked scored a 26.
Who wrote this?
This is the food compass from Tufts University Nutrition Schools, one of the very top rated.
And the lower you go, the worse.
The worst. Those are red foods that are to be minimized.
I'm gonna tip that one upside down for me.
Oh, ground beef is at the top now. It's just ridiculous. And again,
It is who sponsored it, and it says they're Kellogg's and Post. It didn't compare anything else. And then the other foods is just the egg, the cheese, the beef, and milk.
Yep.
Oh, imagine
And that's
that.
it.
And
It
they're
didn't
the ones that you
compare
can find generics of on the
Yep.
shelf in the
Yep.
store.
And again, this was probably taken for somebody who wanted to put this scale together to get a snapshot. Again, this is not the comprehensive list of 8,000 foods, but yes, we're talking about brand name products versus an apple.
Right.
Kale.
Oatmeal cereal, homemade.
Yep.
You know, but then you add brown sugar and honey.
Yep.
Stuff. But I looked at that list and I go, oh, the very top one is the one. Well, what do we have in our pantry right now?
We don't.
This morning. But that mini wheats was what we had,
Yep.
and I would grab that first. And then we had towards the bottom, you have that Special K chocolatey delight, which has not been opened yet. I
It
think.
has.
Okay. And then, but I thought Honey Smacks, but then of course that's the negative at the bottom,
Right.
which it should be because they used to call it
Sugar
Crisp.
Smash.
Yeah, now they've stepped out from the sugar name. Yeah, good point.
But
It's-
they're trying to sell those ones at the top.
Yep. It's absurd. And so yes, these major food organizations kindly will make a vast donation to these schools. These schools then do the studies. We've done studies on studies to show that if you have a study that Coca-Cola pays for, the study is going to come out very favorable for Coca-Cola.
Right.
Duh. Like, yes, it will. We know that. But they've actually had to study the studies to show that in a study. It's nuts. And like I said, I was happy when this one came out because it's so over the top ridiculous. I hoped it at least would make some people wake up to say, again, common sense would tell you that eating a bowl of cereal is not healthier or better for you than eating grilled chicken. Like, it's just not. Who has ever eaten one bowl of cereal and then been like, whew, I'm good. I'm set.
Yeah.
No.
Exactly.
If you read the serving size, another way that people can get the calories down is just make the serving size smaller. It's like a cup or sometimes 3/4. Nobody's eating 3/4 of a cup of cereal ever. I can just eat it in a giant bowl and be starving in 45 minutes. Yes. And now the Kelsey brothers. Have you guys seen the Kelsey brothers now have a branded cereal that's a combination of 3 different cereals, and it shows them eating out of a giant mixing bowl. Like,
Oh,
That
that's
makes
funny.
sense.
I'm gonna sell your soul to a cereal company. Oh my goodness.
That movie I told you about before, Unfrosted, by Jerry Seinfeld.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
If you
I did
haven't
see the preview for that, by the way.
Got it, because it hits on this so humorously. It's just like, especially between Kellogg's and Post.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it did seem like in the preview they were like fighting each other.
Yeah.
I put Stanford on here as another one. This is going to transition us into our last category where we're going to talk about documentaries. But Stanford recently did a study called the Twin Study. Did anybody
Yeah.
see that study? It was in the media.
Yes.
It was also a Netflix documentary. Christopher Gardner is a major player in the food kind of dialogue. He is a professor at Stanford who conducted the twin study. So basically, let's take sets of twins, 16 different sets of twins, so 32 people, one small sample, 8-week study, 4 weeks where they were getting their food given to them, 4 weeks where they could kind of eat whatever they wanted, but were getting some coaching. In the 8 weeks, they showed that there was a minuscule change in LDL cholesterol. There was a big change in things like muscle mass for the group that was eating the plant-based diet. They obviously minimized that effect, maximized the effect of like things that we know hardly anything about, like the microbiome, which actually was collected during the study but not analyzed. That's a big part of the documentary, but there's nothing in the data about what it was actually studied. It was not for this particular study. This is a great example of a study that was I would strongly submit that they wanted to make the Netflix documentary, and they reverse engineered a study to tell a story that they wanted. It's a tiny study. It shows nothing, yet another beautiful Netflix 4-part documentary about all these wonderful things that is not only highlighting the people and how good they feel on these different diets, and then they intermix it with the vegan food companies. That is a commercial. It's a 2 to 3 minute long commercial about how great this bread maker is, and we use plant-based, and then this product is a bar that we sell, and it's this, and it's they're very well done. They're very well funded. He has been a vegan for many years and has been funding that research for a long time. The industry.
Well, when I watched that series, and when it came out, I had to ask myself, is he any more malign in his intentions than my beef rancher friends and cousins?
It's a great question.
It's like it's just whatever your angle is, and that's
a great point.
Getting back to God, you got to really cut and go with your own gut.
Yep.
So to speak, because when I finished that series, I was like, oh God, I was like, that is such a. Anyway, I was like, malarkey.
Yep.
And I walked away from it. But I will admit too, just like you, that it was crisp and glitzy and
yep, very well done.
Very well done and stuff.
We love twins. That's a compelling story. That's okay. We got two of the exact same quote unquote person.
Yeah.
It's very enticing. And you're right. You'd like to think that might not be going on in the beef industry or the cat. We don't know. I don't see as much of it, but you don't know.
No, but so that's why I've got to go as much as possible for me.
Yep.
But it's hard to at a convenient and affordable price compared to even.
It's all you can do.
Because could my grandmother and I walk up the street, that little dull hill, to Main Street in Brigham City, buy fresh ground meat from the butcher shop on the corner for every meal we had that came from a local farm?
Right.
Yes. Did the Tri-Miller meat packing plant, who were good family friends up in Heber, now owned by J.W. Swift.
Yep.
Did it go out of business because the kids didn't want to be in the business?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and so it's kind of like, I just find myself stepping back and going, oh God, nobody's intentions are
just the reality.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that's why I keep asking these questions, and I'll play devil's advocate and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's just like, I just have to find my own.
It's the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
And these are the documentaries. This is the last thing that I put back on the seminar today is the plant-based agendas and propaganda documentaries. Propaganda documentaries, if you've seen What the Health was a really popular one. Cowspiracy was the biggest one. The most recent, really, really big one was the Game Changers, came out about 5 years ago. These are very similar. If you've seen like Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, I believe it was called, was like, again, the everyday guy going on his journey across the country with a blender and blending up smoothies and fix his health, and he wants to fix everybody else. These are very biased, well-done documentaries that they put out there. The most influential that I have noticed, again, in the last few years has been the Game Changers. I have more people, more questions come to me from the Game Changers. It's the original reason why this book was even written, The Great Plant-Based Con, was because Jane Reese Buxton saw this documentary, saw how kind of biased it was, and she wasn't like a nutritionist, but she just saw like how slanted this was in one direction, was concerned, and wanted to look into like, is this really a thing? This seems like this is pretty biased. The Game Changers in particular was directed by James Cameron, director of Titanic, so it was always going to be very, very well made. He is a $140 million investor in Verdient Health, which is a soy protein company. So you find more people that have lots of agendas in the plant-based diet message, lots of people that make money. Remember that plant-based diets are processed foods. So we go back to who has the money, who profits when people eat plant-based diets. It's food companies.
Right.
That's who's funding these documentaries. The Game Changers in particular focused on athletes, showed these athletes that were absolutely thriving. They had one guy like winning strongman competitions that would say something like, well, oxen don't eat meat and they're really strong, and so you should eat like an ox and be strong like me. And you see this guy who's like amazing strongman competition. Turns out he's won this like very minor strongman competition in some obscure contest you never heard about. It's not like he's a main guy. He's not Jackson. He's just some dude who has done this. Or like, I have a list of all the athletes that are featured in this documentary to show how their careers have been ended by injuries, why they retired, why their knees kept blowing up, why they had to leave the diet. It's crazy propaganda that has been absolutely very thoroughly debunked up and down. Like you can go through every single stupid claim in this documentary one by one and debunk the whole thing.
And if you come back to those same people 20 years later and they're on steroids and all kinds of medication,
Right.
Is it because of their lifestyle and how they exercise,
Yep.
or is it because of the diet?
Great point. They show Arnold Schwarzenegger in this documentary and how he's gotten away from meat and eggs. And it's like a few days after Game Changers came out, they do an interview with him. In this interview, he opens up his fridge. There's a giant bowl of eggs in the shot in his fridge. Like, Arnold Schwarzenegger is not a vegan. He's not plant-based. He was not the Olympia as a plant-based athlete. It's very deceptive and deceiving. That one was probably the one that caused the most damage. Like I said, this has been thoroughly debunked. There's an entire chapter on these things in this book. What the Health was really famous for saying that eating a portion, eating one egg was the same as smoking 5 cigarettes or something like that. It's just like, they're just the weirdest kind of claims that they make. Cowspiracy was another one that was very, very damaging. They made the claim famously that cows represent 51% of greenhouse emissions. Cow farts are.
But now they're saying it's the plants that are killing the environment.
It's just like common sense. Like, I've taken this picture before where there's cows on pasture, kind of, well, they're not there anymore, but they used to be kind of by where the prison was. They would stick some cows out there and they would eat. And you look across, I take a picture of these cows, and across the way from the cows is a 12-lane major highway and a concrete company decimating an entire mountain. Is it the cows that are producing, or is it 12 lanes of highway, these giant companies that are spewing all kinds of different chemicals into the environment? So first of all, the makers of this documentary, who were plant-based, had to eventually redact the numbers and say that the 51% was incorrect. It's closer to 16. That's closer, but it's also untrue. Lots of times when they talk about methane numbers, which is what you're talking about when you're talking about cow farts, it's a more volatile, but also calms down in a shorter amount of time. It's like a 10-year kind of greenhouse gas. It comes from the breakdown of cellulose. Anytime you're breaking down cellulose, you get methane. The highest producing methane are companies, but also places like termite farms. They like a termite hill or whatever produce tons and tons and tons of methane, way more than cows. But again, you have to shift that conversation away from cows. So in this country, it's estimated that 9% of our total emissions come from the production of food, 5% come from plant agriculture, 4% come from animal agriculture, and about 2%, again, here in the United States, is believed to come from cows in particular. It's much, much lower than what people think, yet again, they redacted the statement, but they didn't redo the documentary.
What's the majority from it? All of that stuff you mentioned is a small portion.
Transportation is huge. And what about, like, nobody considers this. The medical system is a massive contributor. Right. How much energy do you need to run all hospitals and clinics and produce pharmaceuticals and transport pharmaceuticals, like that's a huge contributor to greenhouse gases.
Well, it's a huge part of the economy. It's the predominant part of the economy here. Tech and medical.
Yep, which all have
medical slash nutritional slash.
Yep,
whatever.
they all have their part in the book. The book is one. If you want to learn more about this, again, when we're doing these like flybys and we're just covering a portion of this, I'm telling you like where I got all of this information. There's several hundred pages. If you want to like make yourself busy, like go ahead. This is where all the details on some of this stuff are, including the environment. That's why this book is the number one kind of reference on there. But you just have to remember that like one example that she gives in the book is like she pulls up an article that was written in like 2020 that says in the article, if you want to make a dent in greenhouse gases as an individual, don't drive a car. That's the best thing you could do. Yeah, walk, take your bike.
You know what? My car has less than 36,000 miles on it. It's 5 years old.
That's the best thing you can do to help the greenhouse gases.
I'm an employee of a transit company because I want to get people out of the cars and their butts on the sidewalk, and let's reduce all this.
In this document, this article that was written, it says like a vegan diet is not going to make that big of a difference. It doesn't make that big of a difference. But the picture, the cover photo for this article is a burger. Why would you write an article that says really doesn't have that much to do with nutrition, sell your car? Why isn't the picture car? Why is it a burger? And again, it's just to make the point. Maybe this was an oversight. Maybe they goofed up, or maybe the way to sell this as a concept to people is tell everybody that the planet is dying. The best thing you can do is switch your food to a plant-based diet, which doesn't really make that big of a difference, if any. Anyway, all of that to say, the homework is to follow the money. It's coming to the realization that Lad comes to, where it's like, if I want the truth in this, I'm going to be endlessly frustrated because I can spin a story any way that I want based on poor data. I can make a headline. If I have enough money, I can make a really beautiful, good-looking documentary. I can sell it to Netflix. They can sell Netflix memberships and keep this thing going. Or you can think critically about like, who makes money? Who is making the money? It will almost always lead you to the truth on some of this stuff. It's nuts. Religions and blue zones and schools and governments and